Little, if any, sunlight could get to the courts, and the atmosphere within the dwellings was always foul, owing largely to the saturated condition of the walls and ceilings, which for so many years had absorbed the exhalations of the occupants into their porous material. Singular testimony to the absence of sunlight in these courts was furnished by the action of the Parks and Gardens Committee, who desired to brighten the homes of the poorest class by gifts of growing flowers and window boxes. But these gifts could not be made in courts as these, as flowers and plants were susceptible to the unwholesome surroundings, and would not live. Mr. George Hoare has compiled the following table on the 3 St. George's parishes, London parishes. St. George's West, 10% of the population overcrowded. Death rate 13.2 per thousand. St. George's South, 35% of the population overcrowded. Death rate 23.7 per thousand. St. George's East, 40% of population overcrowded. Death rate 26.4 per thousand. Then there are the dangerous trades, in which countless workers are employed. Their hold on life is indeed precarious, far, far more precarious than the hold of the 20th century soldier on life. In the linen trade, in the preparation of the flax, wet feet and wet clothes cause an unusual amount of bronchitis, pneumonia, and severe rheumatism, while in the carding and spinning departments the fine dust produces lung disease in the majority of cases, and the woman who starts carding at 17 or 18 begins to break up and go to pieces at 30. The chemical labourers, picked from the strongest and most splendidly built men to be found, live, on an average, less than 48 years. Says Dr. Arledge of the potter's trade, "Potter's dust does not kill suddenly, but settles year after year a little more firmly into the lungs, until at length a case of plaster is formed. Breathing becomes more and more difficult and depressed, and finally ceases." Steel dust, stone dust, clay dust, alkali dust, fluff dust, fibre dust, all these things kill, and they are more deadly than machine guns and pom-poms. Worst of all is the lead dust in the white lead trades. Here is a description of the typical dissolution of a young, healthy, well-developed girl who goes to work in a white lead factory. Here, after a varying degree of exposure, she becomes anæmic. It may be that her gums show a very faint blue line, or perchance her teeth and gums are perfectly sound, and no blue line is discernible. Coincidentally with the anæmia, she has been getting thinner, but so gradually as scarcely to impress itself upon her or her friends. Sickness, however, ensues, and headaches, growing in intensity, are developed. These are frequently attended by obscuration of vision or temporary blindness. Such a girl passes into what appears to her friends and medical adviser as ordinary hysteria. This gradually deepens without warning until she is suddenly seized with a convulsion, beginning in one half of the face, then involving the arm, next the leg of the same side of the body, until the convulsion, violent and purely epileptic form in character, becomes universal. This is attended by loss of consciousness, out of which she passes into a series of convulsions gradually increasing in severity, in one of which she dies, or consciousness, partial or perfect, is regained. Either it may be for a few minutes, a few hours, or days, during which violent headache is complained of, or she is delirious and excited, as in acute mania, or dull and sullen, as in melancholia, and requires to be roused, when she is found wandering and her speech is somewhat imperfect. Without further warning, save that the pulse, which has become soft, with nearly the normal number of beats, all at once becomes low and hard, she is suddenly seized with another convulsion, in which she dies, or passes into a state of coma, from which she never rallies. In another case, the convulsions will gradually subside, the headache disappears, and the patient recovers, only to find that she has completely lost her eyesight, a loss that may be temporary or permanent. And here are a few specific cases of white lead poisoning. Charlotte Rafferty, a fine, well-grown young woman with a splendid constitution, who had never had a day's illness in her life, became a white lead worker. Convulsions seized her at the foot of the ladder in the works. Dr. Oliver examined her, found the blue line along her gums, which shows that the system is under the influence of the lead. He knew that the convulsions would shortly return. They did so, and she died. Mary Ann Toler, a girl of 17, who had never had a fit in her life, 3 times became ill and had to leave off work in the factory. Before she was 19, she showed symptoms of lead poisoning, had fits, frothed at the mouth, and died. Mary A., an unusually vigorous woman, was able to work in the lead factory for 20 years, having colic only once during that time. Her 8 children all died in early infancy from convulsions. One morning, whilst brushing her hair, this woman suddenly lost all power in both her wrists. Eliza H., aged 25, after 5 months at lead works, was seized with colic. She entered another factory, after being refused by the first one, and worked on uninterruptedly for 2 years. Then the former symptoms returned. She was seized with convulsions and died in 2 days of acute lead poisoning. Mr. Vaughan Nash, speaking of the unborn generation, says, "The children of the white lead worker enter the world as a rule only to die from the convulsions of lead poisoning. They are either born prematurely or die within the first year." And finally, let me instance the case of Harriet A. Walker, a young girl of 17, killed while leading a forlorn hope on the industrial battlefield. She was employed as an enamelled ware brusher, wherein lead poisoning is encountered. Her father and brother were both out of employment. She concealed her illness, walked 6 miles a day to and from work, earned her 7 or 8 shillings per week, and died at 17. Depression in trade also plays an important part in hurling the workers into the abyss. With a week's wages between a family and pauperism, a month's enforced idleness means hardship and misery almost indescribable, and from the ravages of which the victims do not always recover when work is to be had again. Just now the daily papers contain the report of a meeting of the Carlisle branch of the Dockers' Union, wherein it is stated that many of the men for months past have not averaged a weekly income of more than from 4 to 5 shillings. The stagnated state of the shipping industry in the Port of London is held accountable for this condition of affairs. To the young working man or working woman or married couple, there is no assurance of happy or healthy middle life, nor of solvent old age. Work as they will, they cannot make their future secure. It is all a matter of chance. Everything depends upon the thing happening, the thing with which they have nothing to do. Precaution cannot fend it off, nor can wiles evade it. If they remain on the industrial battlefield, they must face it and take their chance against heavy odds. Of course, if they are favourably made and are not tied by kinship duties, they may run away from the industrial battlefield, in which event the safest thing the man can do is to join the army, and for the woman, possibly to become a Red Cross nurse or go into a nunnery. In either case, they must forego home and children and all that makes life worth living and old age other than a nightmare. End of chapter 21.